A while ago on stream, I started doing something by myself and then realized it'd be a lot more fun to do it with other people. And it was breaking down different writing aspects and things like that. And one of the things that we did was we discussed the concept of, or I discussed the concept of storytelling in music in the sense of through lyrics. So not actually songwriting or normal like chorus and hooks and that kind of thing that you're going through and stanzas. It was actually more just having a song. So like the story of the hurricane, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, Running Bear, all these little songs that actually just even from the 60s like patches that told a story, sometimes true, sometimes made up, but it was just a song, a narrative that was from start to finish. Another good example of that is a very long example is The Lady of Shalott by Lorena McKennitt. And that's something that just takes the Tennyson poem and puts it to beautiful classical or to Celtic music. While I was doing that, someone asked me if I would do a talk about storytelling in classical music. And I thought this was a very fascinating topic because classical music, or in the classical music world, or just in instrumental music, you still can, and as we discussed during film, talking about film scores, it carries the person along. It evokes emotions. It tells a story. There's music writing for operas, for different things that do have a definitive story written within just the music itself without lyrics. And the other thing that I was looking at with that too is just classical music and writing. Like I say, I generally write all my work with classical music playing because I find lyrics pull me away. I work with words. If I'm listening to something, I automatically start pulling apart, much as I'm sure you do with classical music, pulling apart the intricacies of the lyrics and how it's being written and what it's all about. And so that's one of the things that we agreed we were going to talk about tonight is storytelling through classical music. And so an example that I was mentioning is to you when we were talking previously, a very good and very like kind of on the nose storytelling in music is Peter and the Wolf. So one that a lot of people know, but that's a little bit different. There's actually, I believe that was a narrative previously written, and then the music was written to match the narrative moving forward for that. And then you were mentioning that there's actually a
Yeah, so
term for
there
this.
is yeah, let's back up a little bit. So in the history of music, there's been a lot of different ways the narrative has been integrated with music. But when you want to talk about um, telling a narrative with music alone, that's usually referred to as program music. And it's been done basically for all of history, but it really was the popularity has come and gone depending on when you work. There's many other ways of communicating a narrative in music. You can have um, essentially music which is narrative reinforcement, which would be like an opera, a musical, or a film, right? Where the essentially there's a story being told apart from the music, and the music is there to reinforce or otherwise accentuate the storytelling. But the way that narrative integrates with music that's most interesting to me is program music, which is the idea of music that is written with a story in mind. And so the music itself communicates the story, but there's not necessarily any lyrics, not necessarily some additional accompanying narrative elements. The music itself is speaking the narrative. And a lot of our modern music tropes that are used in film scoring are basically derived from these pieces of program music where, we recognize that a certain set of minor chord motions mean something specific, and then we then pull that emotional meaning forward into film scoring and then copy it and use it over and over again. And then it eventually becomes part of the musical language that an audience understands and recognizes as meaning something specific. But a lot of those individual tropes that you think they could be arbitrarily designed, they weren't arbitrarily designed. It's a learning from culture over time, and this is really well illustrated by if you were to take a lot of Western music that tells these type of stories and go and play it for an Eastern audience, a lot of them wouldn't necessarily pull out those same emotional learnings from that music because culturally there are different sounds that mean those things in their culture that they've been trained to. And there's a good study that covered this 2019, where some scientists basically took Eastern music, Western music, and played it for both a Western audience and an Eastern audience. And they discovered strong narrative attachment to moments of music, but it was culturally specific. So the Western audience felt strong narrative attachment when they were being played music from Western artists, whereas the Eastern audience felt attachment when they were played music from Eastern artists. So there's this cultural element where you have over time become biased to what sounds mean to you because you've heard them meaning that in context before previously in your life. So if you could become a blank slate again and be moved to a completely different region of the world and grow up again, you could learn a completely different set of musical language that would be identified and connected strongly with narrative. So this is super interesting. And one of the things that's the most interesting to me about program music is that even though we think of it as a Western concept and we talk about it, it's called program music because in Western classical music, they a lot of times if music was written with a narrative in mind, the composer would write out the narrative in the program so that when you arrived at the concert, you would know what the story was that was being told to you while you listened. And so, from our perspective and the way that we think about it in a musical history context, we think of it as being a Western thing, but in reality, program music is universal to all cultures over all time, and it's just that different sounds mean different things in different cultures. So I can't take a piece of program music that was written by, like I couldn't take Berlioz's Symphony Fantastique and play it for somebody in China and have them understand the story of, a guy meeting a girl who turns out to be a witch and then he gets beheaded and goes to hell. Like you wouldn't get that communication at all, but like a normal Western person listening to this can feel these kind of movements and like they understand what a waltz is and what a waltz means. They know that it's a dance, right? So the something that's really interesting and important to remember when you're talking about narrative in music is that your listener is primed. Like the narrative that you're trying to communicate can only be communicated to an audience that understands what your musical idea means to begin with. And this is kind of the same with dance, right? Like if I go to the ballet and watch a ballet, I don't necessarily understand the story that's being communicated in dance, but people who are ballet experts know that different movements actually have different narrative meanings, and that when the dancer does this thing, it's representing something from a narrative perspective a lot of times.
I
So
think
I can't understand the narrative, but a lot of other people can.
I think that actually ties in as well into just narrative storytelling in storytelling, in that a lived experiences and lived different worldviews and perspectives will influence. A story written here may not have the same impact, or may have a completely. Actually, I can say for a fact that a story written here has an entirely different impact in Pakistan. One of my short stories is being turned into a film in Pakistan, and I had to rewrite a lot of it just because it was either wildly culturally inappropriate or
Uh-huh.
it was the impact which would like cause tears for someone here over there completely fell flat, and I had to change the emphasis on different parts of the story. So it's fascinating to know that there's in music it kind of ties into the same way, is that the sounds really do have the same emotional and mental tie-in and connection based on where you're from.
100%. And it's interesting. Like, so if you were to write a story about a white savior and show it to the audience over here, you get a completely different reaction to one over there, I'm sure. And like it works the same in music. If I write something that is heavily like Western music bias, like sounds like Star Wars, for instance, and then I go and play it for somebody who grew up on folk music of China, they're going to be completely out of their depth and not understand what they're listening to because those sounds don't process for them. The key doesn't even process for them.
But that's the thing with it though, is but to be clear that not understanding does not equate to not enjoying, because there's a lot of music that I've listened to from multiple different cultures that I no idea what's going on with it, but it still brings me joy. It brings me happiness, and I enjoy it.
So the one thing that's interesting though is your perception of those foreign pieces of music is very different from that culture's perception. So you take that same piece, play it for somebody who's like a native listener from that culture, and they might have an extreme emotional reaction that seems very foreign to you because to them there's something in that piece that means something musically based on what they've been trained in their culture, over their life growing up. And so it works the same way that you described with your narrative.
That's exactly it. And yeah, and to be clear, Kitty, that's the you're right. Understand the culture before attempting to write about it, and that is a thing that needs to be taken into account. And that's the story that I wrote was not culturally inappropriate in any way, shape, or form. It's just a story about. It's called "Moving Day for Mom," and it's someone going to help their mother move. But it was, it had a reference to alcohol in it. It had a reference to different things that. The main issue was moving a dead body, like exhuming and moving a body. But that's the thing, is that it was written for the Western world and where I live here, but it just happened to be picked up by someone over there that was like, this is fantastic, we want to run and work with this. And that's how that ended up working. But so when we're talking about this, so Peter and the Wolf isn't a good example of doing this kind of thing. However,
Peter and the Wolf is actually a very good example. So Peter and the Wolf is a good example of mixing styles of narrative expression in music, because the music itself is communicating the narrative. So from a programmatic perspective, you could take out all of the lyrical sections where the narrator is explaining what Peter is doing, and the music would stand alone on its own and still tell the story. Like, it would act as program music by itself because of the way it is written. Each instrument represents a different actor in the story. Mm-hmm. There are specific motifs for the instruments and for the actors, and the way that those motifs develop tell you about the specific emotional or narrative content that's happening in the story. So the narrator actually giving you the spoken narration between the various segments of music is not necessary. However, you need to understand the reason why the music was written and the audience it was written for. It was written for children, so that it's basically so that it could be communicated to them how program music works. Here is a story told in music, and here's the actual story spelled out in the language that you understand, so that you can now learn how the music is actually telling that narrative. So it's really, really strong example of program music, and it's a strong example of narrative enhancement music because it's doing both.
So it's a good blend then. That's perfect. But another a good example of just pure program music would be something along the lines of like Vivaldi's Four Seasons.
Mm-hmm. That's a great one.
And that's something that can really, as you're listening to it, evokes the emotion of the feeling of each of the four seasons that you're coming along with.
And in Vivaldi's case specifically, he actually left notes in the score, like little poems, basically, about what explicit scene in each of those seasons he was trying to describe with his music. So there actually is like a little bit more of a narrative with it than just, oh, this is summer, oh, this is winter. There's explicit emotions and explicit scenes he's trying to set. And he wrote the notes out in the score. But the average person who's listening doesn't have the score in front of them, and they're not going to know what those notes were. Those notes were to guide the performers to giving a performance that would be representative of the emotional content he wanted to convey.
That's fantastic. Is there other examples that you can think of that are very strong examples of program music that people would be
basically anything written at the end of the Romantic era, almost all of that was program music, like Strauss in particular. There's Don Quixote, there is also Sprague Zarathustra almost is actually program music. Till Eulenspiegel, half of Strauss music is program. I mentioned this earlier, but Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique.
I think Valkyrie would be considered our program music as well, would it not?
What's this now? Which one?
Valkyrie? Flight of...
So technically that's actually in an opera. So,
Oh, that sorry, that is true. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, my
but
brain.
like as a standalone piece, it definitely evokes that imagery of Valkyries riding in, right? Um, oh, another good one is shoot. I'm blanking on the name, but I will come back to it. Um, yeah, I hearing the music in my head and forgetting the name right now, but mostly because I'm also thinking of other Wagner examples. Wagner in general is really good at uh, what I would call tone poems. His overtures to his operas are basically tone poems that are kind of like distilled versions of the storyline of the opera. So it's like if you were to do the Cliff Note version, or I guess in Canada they don't have Cliff Notes, they have something else. What's it called again?
Coles notes.
LJ. There you go, Coles Notes. The
Coles
Coles
notes.
Notes versions of of an opera is basically the overture, right? And so all of Wagner's overtures are very much like tone poems that will tell the entire narrative of the opera because he just goes through the themes in order for the most part. Um,
Because there's
yeah,
also, I
so
think, Tchaikovsky as well, with the like was very romantic in a lot of his writing and kind of carried you along with at least evoking emotion in a lot of his writing as well.
yeah, a lot of the Romantic period in general was concerned about communicating emotion through music, and almost all of the lessons of film scoring that we apply today come from ideas that started in the Romantic era, where you're making musical choices based on the emotion it evokes, not based on the technical constraints of the music that you're working under. Where Baroque music in particular was very programmatic, from not from a narrative perspective, but from a I should say it's algorithmic, not programmatic. That's a better way to describe it in a musical context. So it's very much there is a pattern and a set of things that you do in order to build a piece of Baroque music versus romantic music, which is very much a go with your heart, do whatever feels good type of thing. And then that gave way to the impressionism era, which was no, don't tell me the emotions to feel, give me the impression of the emotion or an impression of what you're trying to communicate. And there actually is a good amount of tone poems and narrative being expressed in the impressionist period as well. And it's interesting to contrast that with the romantic examples, because a lot of times when you listen to something like Phaeton, for instance, from Saint-Saëns, technically is not like on the border, but it's very, very like clear what the story is from beginning to end. Whereas you listen to something like The Sunken Cathedral from Debussy, who was an impressionist, and you have this idea of a cathedral that's underwater rising to the surface. You don't really feel that the narrative is explained to you directly. Instead, you get an impression of it. And so the the impressionists did a really good job of capturing like a capturing the emotion through a filter is kind of a good way to describe it. At least that's kind of how I perceive it.
That's an interesting way of describing it. But that is something that is, I think, difficult for, in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, that it would be difficult to find, to be able to carry from start to finish a narrative through an entire piece, especially a longer piece, and still have it be accessible to a broad audience. How is it that, how would you do something like that where you would be able to carry the say a layman, and that starting at the beginning, carry them through, keep them connected all the way through, keep them in line with the narrative that's going through, and the emotion and the feeling and the story that's being told, without them falling off? Because I feel like if you fall off during the narrative in a classical piece, it's going to be really hard to get yourself back on track and catch back up and
Yeah.
understand where you are in the story again.
So this is one of those things that just like writing music is a skill, listening to music is also a skill. And when composers in the classical era in particular were writing music, they did so, they were paid by benefactors, and they did so for audiences that knew how to listen to music. We're talking about the rich bourgeoisie, like that segment of the population. They had been listening to music their entire life. They had been trained about what these type of musical tropes meant. So it basically they were all really well educated about interpreting the music. So it was really easy for a romantic composer to come in then and write a piece of music that could be narrative and have the audience follow it because the audience was really skilled at doing so at the time. It's different now, right? Like these days, we grow up on popular music. We don't typically grow up on classical music. So most listeners don't actually know what to listen for in classical music when it comes to following narrative in program music specifically. But a lot of them intuitively do because they also watched films, and films borrow a lot of their tropes from a lot of this really popular program music from that era. So, in order to keep audiences engaged, though, with longer pieces, the primary thing that they did would be to break it up into sections. And this is another one where Symphony Fantastique is a good example, right? So it's a symphony in 5 movements, which means that each movement tells a piece of the story. And you don't necessarily have to pay attention to every single moment of every movement. If you just hear a little bit of each movement, you can know the overall narrative that's being told, right? And it's also, yeah, I don't think it's a fair assumption for a composer to make that a listener would be able to follow along with the specifics of a narrative that you're trying to tell at every moment, right? The Even the most well-trained classical music listener isn't going to listen to like 5 notes and be like, "Oh, the character just did this specific thing," and then hear the next 5 notes and be like, "The character now did this specific thing." Instead, you're getting more of like it's more of an impression, right? Like if I show you a picture or if I write it down in words that can communicate, I can be a lot more precise than I can with sound, even if I train you really well on what those sounds mean. So instead, you're kind of getting an emotional perception of the narrative more than a physical one. But that being said, a lot of times I'll kick back and when I listen to these types of music, I'll close my eyes and I'll picture the story in my head playing out and just kind of let my imagination wander. And they're written in a way that allow you to do so. So you don't have to be imagining the exact specific narrative beat that the composer was thinking of when he wrote it. But if you're like somewhere in the ballpark, like if you've got the emotional context correct, then you're probably experiencing it the way the composer intended.
So you're not having to fully pull them along through the entire thing. There's just giving this more ethereal aspect of it. And that actually brings up a really good point of closing your eyes. I do the same thing when I listen to music. I like to, except for when I'm working, it doesn't work so well when I'm writing to close my eyes. But that brings up one of the things. I've been listening to classical music since I was 5 or 6 years old. My grandparents bought me cassette tapes of Mozart and Beethoven, and I wore them out. And one of the things that I absolutely fell in love with and pulled me through is Fantasia. The whole concept of taking classical pieces, classical movements, having artists close their eyes, picture what is brought into them, and to create something visual that can match along with that storyline was just, I think Fantasia is probably one of those things, and Bugs Bunny, I think, are two of the cartoons that really pulled people into classical music as children and kind of started developing this love. That's one thing that I find drives me wild is when people say they don't like classical music and they don't listen to it. And my response is always, well, if you watch movies, if you play video games, if you do any of these things, then you listen to it all the time. Is you're just not picking up and recognizing it.
Yeah, so there's definitely a divide between people who enjoy music that is classical era and earlier. Like, so classical music, of course, is a broad term that we apply to hundreds of years of music history. But the classical era and earlier usually takes people who are more like dedicated fans, more hardcore fans to really get into that type of music compared to like your Beethovens and your Stravinskys and your Bartoks and your more recent people. Philip Glass, great example, film score, also a classical composer. But people listen to his stuff and they just hear it and they like it. But that stuff's easy to get into compared to something like Bach, which is Baroque and is very technical and has a lot of moving pieces. And so some people really gravitate towards that and attach really easy, and a lot of people are just like, no, that's too hard, too much moving. They can't latch onto anything.
Yeah, and that does make sense. That does. But what are your thoughts on the whole concept of Fantasia. And they also actually, they did, I think it was Fantasia 2000, where they did a repeat of that concept.
And I love Fantasia. I loved it as a kid. I still love it as an adult. Great idea, really cool. I'm really sad every time that they trim a piece of classical music down in order to scoring the entirety of the Rite of Spring suite. Or not the Rite of Spring, but the Rite of Spring was the first movie, but the Firebird suite. They did the last three movements essentially, or did they do the whole thing? They may have done the whole thing, but they clipped like a whole bunch of stuff out from it, and it makes me so sad. I'm like, no, that's not what happens in the music. The music goes there now. So aside from that, where like I'm too much of a purist and I love the way the songs were originally, the animation is fantastic in a lot of those. Like in particular, the animation quality for like Night on Bald Mountain in the original, or the Firebird Suite in Fantasia 2000. It is just fantastic. Like really well animated, and really captures sort of the intent of the pieces. A lot of times there is no program, and so they're working off of nothing. Sometimes there is a program, and they actually stick with the program. Night on Bald Mountain is a great example, actually. So it's about an evil demon waking up and taking over the souls of a town, and that's what they animated. And so they do that in some cases. In other cases where they're dealing with absolute music, which by the way is the term for all other music that is not considered program music in classical music land. When they're doing absolute music like Beethoven's Fifth, when they did that one, it's literally just these abstract butterflies flying around, right? So they tell an interesting story and there's something interesting happening, but their narrative is new. That is not what Beethoven had in mind when he wrote the piece, right? So they are enhancing the existing music or using the music as a narrative enhancement to their narrative that they're telling. But I love it. I wish that it would have caught on. Disney originally wanted it to be a rotating yearly thing where there'd always be a Fantasia in the theater, and every year some of the old pieces would rotate out and new ones would rotate in, and you would just constantly get new classical music. And it didn't perform well enough at the box office to enable him to do that. And I'm really sad. I wish it would have. Or I wish that he could have gotten like a government grant maybe to continue doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's fantastic music education. Like people watch that movie just to see Mickey. Like, and they're saying they're listening to a brilliant piece by Dukas. So like it's a win-win for everybody. You get to see Mickey and you get to listen to and learn new awesome classical music.
It definitely is, but I think that is something that's kind of a little bit difficult for the average person that's not an ardent fan of classical music to sit in a movie theater and sit through the entire thing from start to finish. It is very abstract.
I've talked to a lot of people about this over the years, and I think that the problem isn't that it's abstract with no dialogue. I think the problem is that, especially for the original one, they went to go see Mickey. They thought they were going to get an hour and a half of Mickey stories backed by classical music, and instead it was a trip. If you remember the original one, the only thing crazier than the original Fantasia is that segment in Dumbo where he's having the acid trip. Like, it's literally the only Disney thing that's crazier than Fantasia was.
Yeah.
So, like, if it had been more grounded, if they had told one story and scored the entire thing with classical music, I think it would have been much more well received, and I think it would have been just more interesting to watch too, because you would have had the stakes that you usually have when you engage with a narrative, right? Like you become attached to a character, and then you want to see them succeed as they continue through a narrative. Whereas with Fantasia, it was every 5 minutes you were getting a new cast of characters, and a lot of times they weren't even characters. There's just some kind of abstract thing going on screen. So. Yeah. I'm not surprised that it wasn't successful and that a lot of people weren't able to attach to it. I think there's ways to fix that. I would love to see somebody try it again, but like I said, pick a single narrative and then just use classical music as a score for that narrative.
Well, and that's I agree, that would be a fantastic thing to see. And one of the things that I really like about The Night on Bald Mountain is the way the animators animated that scene. Really did, like, I found that was one of the ones for me that was a really beautiful tie-in, because that scene, watching that scene was like watching my emotions. When I listened to the music, that is what I felt, is what was played out in front of me. And as a kid, that's something pretty fantastic to be able to, like, there's something kind of like earth shattering to be able to experience that, of seeing this. Like there's not only the connection between the two pieces, but there's also you're involved in that connection as well, and it ties you in, and that's something that I found was absolutely beautiful for that. There used to be a Disney thing. I can't remember what it was, and I've been trying to find it ever since. But every once in a while on Magical World of Disney, Sundays at 6 p.m., they would take music from the 1950s and 60s and do an entire hour of cartoons with Donald Duck and everyone else, that was set to classical, or that was set to popular music from the 1950s and 60s. And I think those were some of my favorite episodes of the Magical World of Disney that they ever came out with, because it was just, again, you got to see your favorite characters tied in with this amazing music that was really great, that I had a personal connection to because my parents listened to all the time. And so I can definitely see how having more of a linear narrative or more involvement of cast of characters that you're not trying to learn a new cast every 5 minutes, like you said. It's even if it's a character that you already know what they're about and they're in this scene and it's scored, would definitely have made it more of an anchor for people.
Yeah, if they had even just rotated through the existing Disney cast for all the different things, then there probably would have been a higher attach rate, especially for the original one. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of power, though, in these type, like what you're describing, Looney Tunes and Fantasia as an entry point to classical music is a really common story that I hear. Lots of people are like, oh no, I love classical music because I saw Fantasia when I was a kid and loved it. So there's really good opportunities there to make more media like that and to get more people into classical music. But like, that's great if people want to be interested in it. I think I used to be much more of a purist in terms of like, oh no, everybody should listen to classical music. It's the best. But as I've gotten older, I've definitely mellowed on that to the point that I feel you could get a lot of the value, a lot of the best parts of classical music by watching films. There's a lot of really, really well written film scores that are taking the best pieces of classical music over the years and basically dishing it out for your enjoyment. And they do you the favor of attaching it emotionally to the film that you're watching. So, like, there's a lot of good stuff out there to listen to, and you're not going to be able to listen to every piece of music on the planet. So, pick what you enjoy, go with it. But I do wish that there was, more opportunities for people to discover the world of classical music.
Well, speaking of that, of songs or these pieces being used and used very well. Oh, thank you for the gifted sub. Very much, Sparkle McSpark. Let's get some love in chat for the for that, and thank you for the follow. I apologize if the following thing is blasting at anyone's eardrums. I don't know if that's happening or not. But thank you for the follow, Sparkle McSpark, and thank you for the gifted sub. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is something that obviously in a writing stream that comes up a lot, and even my last stream was the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Mm-hmm. What is your opinion on the scoring of the films that are going through? Not to put you on the spot if you don't like it, but yeah.
So there was a good video on YouTube from, I think it was Nerdwriter. It may have been Every Frame of Painting or one of the other really, really top tier video essay channels about scoring in the Marvel Universe, where the filmmaker literally went and just interviewed people in, I think it was downtown Vancouver is what it looked like. Just kind of walked around asking people, hey, sing me Star Wars. Hey, sing me E.T. Hey, sing me this film, that film. Hey, sing me The Avengers. And then people would stare blankly at the camera like, they couldn't do it because the music and scoring in general has become very homogenous to where it all very much sounds alike. And I partially blame Hans Zimmer for this, who himself is very brilliant and will bring us things like Interstellar, which is a fantastic score, but then also has created this industry where everybody is literally just aping his style and doing what he does in order to, basically complete on time and to get as much engagement as possible from the score. But it's all very homogenous. It sounds very alike. So it's difficult to nail down melodies and themes and motifs and remember them. That being said, I do know the Marvel motif and can sing it. but only because after I saw that video, I went back and listened to the score so that I could memorize the damn thing. So, and the thing that really kills me about this is that the Avengers score was written by Alan Silvestri, who wrote Back to the Future. You can sing Back to the Future. I know you can. So, like, the guy knows how to write a really, really catchy theme. He was being instructed to write things the way that it was written by the director, the company. So most film scorers can deliver things that are more identical than what they currently do, but they can't either due to time constraints or constraints being put placed on them by the director or the film company. So that being said, I generally find most of the Marvel scores to be very homogenous. They very much are falling in line with a lot of the rest of the industry and the sound in general that it makes. I can sing the Avengers theme. I can sing the main like Marvel intro theme, and that's really about all I can remember off the top of my head. Like I know that a lot of the characters have some of their own motifs in various movies. I
Mhm.
can't remember any of them. They're just so they're very bland. They blend into the rest of the music landscape. They don't stick out.
So what would
And
you
part
say? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
and I was gonna say that like part of that is like the way they're written, but part of it is also the scores are not really composed motivically the way that say Star Wars was, right? Where Star Wars is literally like 20 or 30 musical ideas and then the entire score is composed from interspersing those ideas to tie them directly with characters or emotions or actions in the film. And the Marvel films aren't really scored that way. They're scored we usually call it like through composed. The idea is that they're aiming for a certain sound or feeling or emotional impact, and there's like one big theme really. And I think some of the characters do have motifs. I just don't remember them. They're just very homogenous.
Yeah, they're. I agree. They are homogenous, and that's what I was going to ask you. Is there something to be said for having a motif that stands out that really sticks in people's heads, and they go back and they can sing it off the top of their head, versus something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where one of the perspectives that I had from it is that it's not something that's going to stick out and get stuck in your head as you're walking around during your day, but it is something that as soon as you hear it, it releases this sense of adrenaline. It releases this sense of familiarity, this sense of comfort, and it sets you into a comfortable zone in space to watch the movies, to know that you're following the same story, like through a timeline kind of through of all the different stories, and it evokes a sense of comfort when you're
You
watching.
definitely recognize that it sounds like Marvel when you hear it, right?
Yeah.
They've worked very hard to establish a musical language for the Marvel universe. So even though nothing sticks out specifically, you know a Marvel film when you hear it because they worked very diligently to make sure that everything sounded like itself. It has a Marvel sound.
Yeah.
And so that is good in a lot of ways. But in terms of what's better, I think it depends on what you're wanting your music to accomplish, right? So as a filmmaker, when you contract a score, like you need to ask yourself a million different questions, like what type of music do you want for this film? What type of emotional experience do you want the user to have? The music is going to be providing a large portion of that experience, so you need to make sure to nail that. And for Marvel, it feels very much like they care a lot about the continuity between all the films. They definitely want you to feel like you're watching a Marvel film, but they don't necessarily care if you identify one specific theme or one specific character or a musical moment, right? They want the whole thing to have one sound, so as a whole, it's Marvel. That's the strategy they've gone with. That's what they would like. I personally like songs that have strong motifs, or not songs, but films that have strong motifs. But I also like films don't, that still have really brilliant scores. Um, really good example would be like Arrival, which I can't sing off the top of my head right now, but that score is baller. Like it's a really really good score, and uh, and I could listen to it on repeat. But like off the top of my head right now, I can't think of the theme, but it does have a good theme in it. And there are other things where the motifs are so small that you don't even think of it as being related to that movie. Interstellar is a good example of this. Zimmer's main motif is really just two notes, one interval, and then lots of permutations of that. But you hear that bum bum bum, and you know it's Arrival when you hear it in the context of the rest of the music. The theme or the motif by itself doesn't sell it, but it's still a very very good score.
It's almost an
And
attempt of
so,
a copy of Beethoven 6 to just use the same
uh-huh,
going
uh-huh,
through and tying it in. Not quite as
yep.
successful though.
Well, I mean, it's film music, yeah, but it's still extremely well written, and extremely good as a score. The the thing that I would say is that it depends completely on the goal of the score, the goal of the film, right, and the skill level too of the composer. Somebody like John Williams can spit out motivic, scores all day long, but somebody like Goranson maybe can't. Like it just depends completely on what style of score, what style of music you want, what style of experience you want for your user, your viewer.
Yeah. And I think the thing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe too is, like you said, they're relying less on a motif that's going to stand out and more of that we're discussing of the comfort level of that that you're in a Marvel film. And I think one of the reasons why they did that is in my mind, I think that they were believing that more Marvel, our characters are going to carry this. It's not necessarily. It's not. We're not concerned about people picking up and remembering a certain piece of music from a scene. They're going to remember the action, the hero, what happened in that scene, because that's where the big connection with the Marvel universe is that people have physically to the storylines and to the characters. And I think that's one of the things potentially that they put their focus more on doing that, and then just using the music not as an afterthought but as a secondary substructure to create the lines of continuity and comfort for the viewers
Yeah,
to know that they get into that mind frame.
part of that is some of that was intentional, some of that was not, I would say. I mean, they hired Alan Silvestri to score Avengers, who is one of the best motivic writers in Hollywood, and explicitly made the motif for the Avengers be 2 bars long, so it's like barely enough for you to hook onto, right? There's not a full melody. It's just like a couple of notes and a couple of stabs. Wonder Woman is another good example of a theme like this, where it has a very specific like sound to it, but like there's not much melodic content there, so it's not very hooky, right? Um, I think that the goal was to have good music. It always is to have good music, but they fell into the same trap that a lot of modern Hollywood is falling into, which is they provided um, temp music, temp tracks, and then they told the composer, make it sound like the temp track, which is really, really common these days, where they say, I want it to sound like this. I want this explicit emotional sound. And so you end up getting a lot of scores that are copy and paste of each other that are very, very similar to the point where like maybe there's only one instrument changed and the musical content is almost identical because the composers are being told to copy the temp music. And you see this complaint a lot amongst the modern scorers. Hans Zimmer has a great video on it's either his YouTube or on Spitfire's YouTube, where he does a sit down with a bunch of other scorers, and they talk about for 30 minutes or more, like they're supposed to be talking about all sorts of different things, and instead they spend most of the time complaining about temp music and about how it's ruining their industry. So definitely a good listen if you've got time to spare and you want to learn more. But in reality, if I'm a composer for a film, I'm not just an artist creating music. I am a worker responsible for delivering an artifact to somebody who is paying me to do so. And so if they say, I want X, Y, and Z, I need to deliver X, Y, and Z. So if you put temp music in your movie and then give it to me and say, make it sound like the temp music, oh, you only have 2 months, go. I'm going to make it sound like the temp music. I'm not going to have time to be creative and build anything really dramatically unique and interesting. So it's kind of just a consequence of the choices that the industry as a whole has made. It's just sort of become standard for everything to have temp music because it's so easy to do technologically now. Whereas back in the day, it was really hard to do temp music. You had to like have a little, tape recorder and set stuff up manually. And even when you did have temp music, the temp music was much more interesting. Like the tech music for Star Wars was things like Mars from the Planets, which you can clearly hear in the beginning, and Corn Gold, and you can clearly hear those influences on Williams' score, but he wasn't told make it sound exactly like the tech music. He had a lot more artistic freedom and a lot more time to write it. So part of it is explicitly their choice to decide what the emotional content of each scene was going to be ahead of time, and then tell the composer to make it sound like that, but be unique and new.
Yeah.
So I think that Silvestri did a great job explicitly on Avengers. Like that main hook actually is pretty hooky. But other than that, most people couldn't sing anything from the Marvel series, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you on that. That is a good point. But and to let everyone know in the chat, I think I fixed the audio issue of the notifications. So if you want to continue with notifications, go ahead. I believe they should be stopped and not deafening anyone. For some reason, my mixer has changed.
Was it too loud? Oops.
Yeah, I think it was too loud. But yeah, I think I've silenced all. There we go, silence notifications. So thank you for the follows, thank you for the raids, thank you for the bits. I appreciate you all. And thank you for the subscriptions, Sparkle Mexico Park. So yeah, that
give sub hype.
Yes, we have to create some sub hypes. We have to. There's a lot of things I have to build out in my stream.
It's a never ending chore.
Oh, that's it. But it's a chore that we love. That was a very loud, silent air hill. But that's the thing that I was going to say is that that's going to hurt as an artist, as a composer, to have to. I mean, I understand having to deliver timelines and be able to get a product, and ultimately what the client wants is going to be what you need to work with. But that's the thing that I find, like, to me, that must be something that's kind of painful. If someone's like, no, stop your creativity, and we just need you to do this.
Yeah, it was one of the reasons for sure that I ended up not going into film scoring, was that I definitely am I enjoy the freedom of artistic creativity more than I should in order to be successful as a film scorer, right? As a film scorer, you really do need to be able to buckle down and deliver under tight deadlines. And it's hard to do that if you're really trying to be super creative the entire time, especially because when you're creative, you're taking a risk at delivering something that doesn't meet the needs of the person who is paying you. And so it's safer, if you want to stay in business and stay fed, to deliver what the customer wants, even if it means cutting back on your creativity and doing things that you already know how to do that have already been done before, and making small minor adjustments. So in some cases, the industry is sort of a product of itself, right? Like, in order to fix that, you'd have to decentralize the payment of the creators of the music scores from the creation of the art itself. So instead of the director paying them, they would have to get paid by like some joint arts organization that pays a salary instead of a per job type of thing. And a lot of scorers don't want that, because scorers who are really good at it are making bank. Yeah. Like, you can, if you're John Williams, you're making $2 million a score, and you can knock them out really quickly because you've been doing it for 50 years. Like, why? Actually, at his point, he's been doing it for 65 years at this point. Like, why would you ever do something that's more difficult if you can literally walk into the studio and walk out with $2 million a couple months later?
That lessens the pain. That's a bit of a salve.
Yeah, right. So now, not everybody is at the top of the industry getting paid that much, right? Yeah. Like normal film score, an average film score is probably making more like $250,000 a score, and it's something that they can do like twice a year, maybe 3 times a year.
That's still a pretty good payday at the end of the
year. So still quite good, but that's the average. That's somebody who's been working for a while and has established themselves. A new film scorer gets paid much less. Yeah. Much less.
That makes sense. Kitty, don't worry about the air raid siren or the sound interrupting the interview. It wasn't an interruption. We had a crow interrupting the interview earlier, so it's all good. It's fine. But that kind of ties back to a similar problem within the writing world, where a lot of authors are now choosing to self-publish because they come down to this question of if it's not sellable, the publishing house isn't going to pick it up, an agent isn't going to pick it up if it's not something that fits the mold, fits what's currently popular, what's currently selling. And not formulaic, but it just follows a certain guideline. If you want to be creative and completely off the wall and do something completely yourself, a lot of people are finding it's easier, and maintain the creative control, it's easier to just self-publish and go out, break out on your own and do your own thing. Again, at the great at the expense of profit. If you get picked up by a publishing house and get mass production and their marketing dollars and everything like that behind you and their experience, then you can make a lot more money as a writer. But if you want to keep the creative edge and the creative content and have full control and not have to alter what you want to create to match a mold that's going to sell, you're going to take a hit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that so ultimately every artist has to make a choice for how they want to create their art, what they want to get out of it, right? For authors, you maybe have the chance to self-publish, or you have the chance to sign with a publishing company. Maybe there's other options. For a composer, I can write music for myself, for nobody. I can try to write music and build relationships with orchestras and see if I can get them to play my stuff if I'm writing orchestral music. I could become a film scorer. I could write music for games. I could write standalone tracks and stick them into a service that sells it for generic use for scoring. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of options available. It's about picking the right fit for what you want to accomplish. And so, like, for me personally, I just enjoy writing music. I don't necessarily need to get paid for it. And I actually prefer not having my art tied to my living directly, which is not what I thought when I was younger and wanted to be a film scorer, right? I was like, oh, I just want to write music all the time. And I enjoy writing music quite a lot. But I also enjoy having stable income. And if you're a film scorer, you're reliant on getting hired for a job. So if you get hired for a job and you do well, that word of mouth can translate and maybe you get hired for a couple more. But if you perform poorly, then maybe word gets around and other people don't want to hire you. And so you end up going through a slump where you're not making any money. So you're very reliant if you work on like a contract basis, very reliant on other people for your stability, your comfort of life. So for me, I prefer making a career in a different field, so programming for me right now, and using my free time to write music and potentially, publishing through some other means. So I get a lot of satisfaction just in creation. I'm not a narcissist. I don't really need people to listen to my stuff or hear my stuff. Like, I don't need to publish it in order to feel like I've accomplished a lot. Like, just the act of creating gives me a lot of joy personally. So creating and then sharing with other people and then bringing them joy obviously brings me even more joy, but I don't have to have that in order to feel fulfilled as an artist personally. So I think everybody has to individually find what works best for them.
And I think I agree with you completely. And it comes down to what we were talking about at the beginning of this whole thing, and that's honesty. Being honest with yourself and being able to have those difficult conversations with what are you looking to try to get, what are you trying to do, and are you willing to have the trade-off for different things by trying to get into the career. Because I think that's the thing, is anytime you get into a high-level professional version of an artistic career, the creativity definitely becomes a trade-off. Because once someone is paying you, and especially if they're paying you a good amount of money, then there's automatically a blockage to your creativity. You don't have free reign. Typically, I know there's instances where you do, but you're now listening to there's someone telling you what they want and how they want it. And you kind of get boxed in with.
Yeah, and we mentioned this earlier. Sometimes those limitations can be really invigorating from a creative perspective. Like, it can be interesting to work within creative constraints. But it depends on what those constraints are and whether they're acceptable for you personally. Like, so for me, if I went to score a major Hollywood blockbuster and they told me make it sound like the temp music, that would be too constraining. That would not allow me to express my artistic freedom, my individuality as much as I would like to. But if I were to go in and sit down with, more of an auteur filmmaker who said, "Hey, I'm looking for this type of emotional feeling here, this type feeling here. What do you think about this and this?" and actually spitballed and worked with me back and forth, and it was a real collaboration, I would really enjoy that experience, and I would love to do that. So the problem is, if you become a scorer, you don't necessarily get to choose to do that second type all the time. You sometimes are going to have to do the big budget film in order to, make some money so that you can eat. So like, it's an unfortunate side effect, right? You know, if you're selling your art, you then have to make hard choices about, you know, when do you quote unquote sell out, I guess is the way that most people would say it.
Yeah. That's something that's always kind of bothered me. I think that's the whole concept of selling out is something that there comes a point where if that's what you're doing, you have to survive. And I see it more as having sacrifices than selling out, personally.
I mean, it depends. So there's a giant difference between somebody who quote unquote sells out because they need to do a job in order to eat, and somebody who is now a multimillionaire and doesn't need to do anything except for what they want to do, but instead chooses to, quote unquote sell out.
Yeah.
You know,
Then
so
that would be a sellout. But I think someone that is having,
it's an optics thing, right?
yeah. But I mean, like an actor that's now doing shampoo commercials is something that not necessarily selling out just to make a buck. It's doing
Yep.
what you can to survive, which sometimes you have to do that.
So, and to Kitty's point, she posted in chat earlier, not a question of sellable, but a question of if the publisher's thinking it will sell. That affects music as well. Like if you're being paid to write music for a film, whether or not they hire you rests on their appraisal as to whether your music will be the thing that sells the movie, right? Like every single choice that's made for every piece of media that's made by Hollywood, especially the big budget things, it's scrutinized. So when they choose who's going to write the music, it's not like, oh, I want so and so, and it's done. It's usually a big discussion, like whose music is going to fit best. How is this going to impact the experience of the viewer? How is this going to make a difference uh, to to our box office, to our bottom line? So there's a lot of scores that would be really good fits or interesting choices for movies that wouldn't get hired just because the people making the movie have a praise that it wouldn't sell as well as somebody else. And this is one of the reasons why people like Williams and Zimmer continue to get work over and over and over again, because they're proven sellers, right?
Yeah.
They're known quantities.
Well, and that's something that's always kind of stuck with me in the back of my mind with my writing is that I've actually fired editors because of this, and is that human emotion impacts things so much. Like I've discussed on stream before, a play that I saw after, like when I had hurt myself, and I was uncomfortable the entire time I watched the play and absolutely hated it. I was miserable the whole time. I thought it was a terrible, stupid play. And after I healed up and I was feeling better, I went back and I was thinking about it again, and I realized there were some points that I really truly liked, and it was a fantastic play, and I want to watch it again. But it's one of those plays that tours like once every 30 years, and so that opportunity is kind of lost. And the same thing for movies and things like that. And I think that's part of the thing when you submit a story to a smaller publishing agency or to an editor, where I've had an editor that I'd send something in, and they would, if they were in a good mood, it would be fantastic and it was great and things would work really well and it'd be a great relationship for that story. But if that story happened to land on their desk when they're in a bad mood, then it would just like it would get torn to shreds, and it would just become this like contentious argument back and forth. And that's so I mean, out of true professionalism, you don't let emotion factor in and stuff like that, but what you're going through in your personal life can have an impact on what media you're taking in. Now I know on a bigger scale, like with a film score, there's more than one person that's watching and paying attention, making that choice, but there is still the concept of human emotion and perspective that can completely trash something. Like you said, that because someone feels it's not going to work, well, if they were having a better day that day, that may not have been the decision they came to.
Yep. And it's tough in general. Anytime you're relying on somebody else, you have to deal with the human factor. We're all human. We all have bad days.
Yeah.
We all make poor decisions sometimes. Like it's just a fact of life. And one thing that it's important though is to be honest about your own work. If a publisher doesn't think it will sell, it doesn't mean that it won't sell, but it also doesn't mean they're wrong either. Like you need to make an accurate appraisal with the same knowledge that they have, which means sometimes you need to talk with them and get that knowledge. Like I have this problem, since I'm helping run Sword and Board. I am not an expert in publishing at all, but we're publishing a book, so we're learning a lot as we go. A lot of it is asking questions, doing a lot of research, learning, but being honest about where we are in the process and not, acting like we have the best product in the world because it's my wife and my wife's book. I mean, I think it's quite good. Even though I have not yet completed it yet, I have read a lot of it and I did provide quite a bit of feedback. I enjoyed what I read, but I don't know enough about writing and enough about publishing to be like, oh, this is the best book in the last, 10 years or whatever. I can't honestly say, oh, this is fantastic. And like the publishers don't know what they're talking about. This would totally sell. I think it would, but I don't know what they know.
Yeah.
And also we decided not to go, published by a mainstream publishing house for other reasons anyway. But if we were to have done that, and if they had come back and told us it wasn't suitable for publishing, I think we would have taken that honestly and been like, cool, let's take a look at it and see what we could change or improve or make better to make it something that is, more monetizable. Or, maybe we like it the way it is and we think that this is something new that people would be interested in reading anyway, even if it's not, popular enough to sell millions of copies. Maybe it's popular enough to sell like 100,000 copies instead. And so the publisher won't pick it up. And maybe that's fine for us. And so we would choose to self-publish. But like either way, you got to honestly appraise the information that you're given.
Yeah. And that is exactly it. You do have to, and I think that's the hard part as a writer, and I'm sure as a musician as well, is that you have to be able to step back and not just latch on because I created this and this is mine. And it's like you said, it's perfect. You have to be able to have those honest conversations, whether you're in the situation with Sword and Board, or if you're in the situation with a traditional publishing house or anything along those lines. You're not always going to agree, but with what the publisher is saying or what your agent is saying. But occasionally, that scene that you really, really love, that is amazing, that it ties the entire book together, and that it was the entire reason you wrote that book, just needs to get cut.
Yep.
As painful as that is, you have to.
I think Larissa just encountered that with Pantheon Prophet, second book in the series.
Because of you, I'm seeing some stuff here in chat.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I haven't finished her book because I read the first 10 chapters of the book 20 times. Not that many, but I read it several times offering feedback and then getting revisions. And so you can only read the same thing so many times before. I have ADHD, and so I struggle to read print anyway. I much prefer audiobooks. I can stay much more tightly engaged with an audiobook than I can with print. In print, what'll happen is my mind will start wandering. I'll start imagining things, but my eyes will keep moving. And so then I'll catch myself and have to figure out where I was actually reading and go back and start again and again. And if I've already read something before, that's more likely to happen to me. So for me, it's a struggle. I need to actually get an audiobook made of her book so that I can complete it. But basically, I had offered and done first editing passes on the very beginning of the book and provided a lot of feedback that I think turned out pretty well.
Yeah, well, that's great, and that is something that is. But I mean, and that's part of the challenge of just in general when you're writing a story or you're trying to give someone honest feedback. The more you've stared at it, the more you've read it, the more difficult it becomes to be objective when you're looking at it, and the easier it is for your mind to just slide. Because you're like, oh, I know what's happening in the scene. So then you start thinking about something else. And then you're like, I don't know, I have to pull myself back. And where was I? What was I doing? And but that's the thing where I think it becomes difficult to become objective because you do get into that territory where of familiarity where it either becomes one side of two coins, which is either two sides of a coin, which is either this is great and you just keep sliding along with it, or you stared at it for so long that you start thinking that it's trash and terrible and it's formulaic and it's obvious and people are going to know what's happening. And, I thought there was suspense and there's no suspense in this at all. But it comes down to the fact that it's obvious to you because you've been over that scene 30 times.
I have the same problem in music, and definitely saw Larissa going through that issue with the book. But I I think with music it's slightly different because I can always listen to it and be like, okay, does this sound like anything else I've heard before? Can I compare it and get a sense as to whether or not this sounds cheesy or corny or hokey? And truthfully, what I've discovered through doing that over the years is that if I listen to something over and over and over again, no matter what it is, it'll sound cheesy and corny because it's just so familiar.
Yeah.
Um, and I've also discovered that a lot of people have different thresholds for what triggers that for them. So even though it won't sound too over the top to me, it might sound too over the top to another listener. And that's just, I think, something I've had to come to accept, that not everybody who listens to what I write is going to like what it is. And what I really have to do is make sure that I'm achieving what I'm aiming to achieve. Like, does it sound like what I'm aiming at? Is it close enough to that? Yes. Okay, cool. It's good. If it's not, then I need to go back to the drawing board and work on it more.
And that's what brings in the importance of having more than one beta tester or listener, or to what you're working on, or a reader. Is that something I was discussing on a panel the other day, is that if you've got beta testers out there looking at your stuff and one comes back and says, this is too over the top, I don't like it, and then that's easy to kind of brush aside and be like, well, that's just your opinion. But if you've got 5 beta testers and 3 come back with the same opinion, I was like, okay, I really need to step back and look at this objectively. I'm not being objective enough, which is good. And it looks like you've got a narrator for the book. Sporkle McSpork wants to narrate the book for you.
Everybody wants to narrate the book. It's interesting, like trying to balance quality of audio recording with amount spent. I've been doing a lot of research on this recently, and like we had some audiobook performers in mind actually when we started looking to get an audiobook made. But it's actually really difficult to contact a lot of them and to contract them because they either already have pre-existing contracts with specific publishing houses, or like one of the places that I reached out to is literally a they choose their own projects type of thing. They have the narrator that I want, and I said, hey, we would like to, here's the book information. Please consider it for an audiobook, but we never heard back. So it's one of those things. It's like once LJ is an established author and there's like 2 or 3 books out there, then it'll be really easy to be like, hey, look at this series and how well it's done, and can we maybe get an audiobook made? But like when you're a brand new person starting off, it's really hard to get any kind of recognition or even feedback from the big houses that handle this stuff. So what's going to end up happening is I'll end up hiring somebody like Sporkle McSpork, most likely, that'll do the narration, and then I'll have to do the formatting and create the book myself, most likely, because most of these other outfits that will handle everything for you, where you just kind of give them money and you get an audiobook back, most of them are overloaded with projects right now.
Yeah, because audiobooks are definitely becoming a huge thing with Audible and these other organizations. That's just got me wondering too if there's something of a reputation that's developed for narrators, if they will refuse, like an actor will refuse to pick up a certain role because they think it's going to lessen their career, lessen their name. And I wonder if that's a similar thing in the narration of audiobooks, if it's getting to that level of an industry where people are becoming popular and famous for their voice and what they're doing, and then they will not take on smaller projects or unknown projects because they don't know how it's going to impact their overall career.
I think that likely is happening at the top tiers of the audiobook recording world, because I myself have done that with narrators I liked on Audible, where I literally would go and say, I love this guy's voice, I love his narration, what other books has he done? And I just go and buy stuff. Like that's how LJ Stanton found the recording of Shahnameh, is because Mark Thompson was narrating it, and we love his narrations of the Star Wars novels. So I think that is happening for sure at a high level already in the industry. And it definitely happens for actors, man. Actors are all about protecting their brand, their identity, and Twitch streamers too. Like being on brand is really important if you want to grow.
Yeah, it is. And that's something that I'm really coming to realize with this is, the way I function on things, like with Twitch streaming, I will put X amount of dollars towards setting up and getting myself doing it properly. And once I've made that initial investment, I need what I'm working on to start funding itself. Now, there are points where I'm not there yet with Twitch. So there are points where, like, you know what, I can now see that in order to hit that tier, for that to happen, I need to input this much more money. But I'm not going to go and just start throwing money out willy-nilly to try to build myself up, because that's a really great way of crashing.
How to go bankrupt.
Yeah, and crash and burn
No,
kind of thing.
absolutely. So in good stream, yeah, as a Twitch employee and a Twitch streamer myself, I can tell you good streams are not built on gear. They're built on quality of content. So you need to be able to nail down your brand, your content first before you start investing in gear. There's tons and tons of streamers on Twitch that are streaming to 0 viewers that have like $700 cameras. Just like, what? Why? like literally no one is watching you. No one is seeing your beautiful $700 frame. Right?
Yeah. Well, that's it, and that is something that you do. And I find, like you said before, it's an evolving thing and a never-ending project, and that's something that, even I realized, and I did figure it out for you and for chat. I think I said earlier, but August 15th is my 1-year anniversary. August 15th of last year is when I did my first stream, and you can. I mean, a lot of the VODs are gone. Most of the VODs from back then, or all the VODs from back then, are gone. But that's something that, even if you look at the VODs that are available now to here, there is a massive shift in what I've done. As I started realizing what I was doing and what I needed to be doing, my branding got better, my schedule got tighter. I consider this like a day job. It's really hard for me to take a day off if I'm doing something. Like, I know I have to have the continuity. And now even with this, like, the framing that we have for our interview needs to be adjusted and grown. A black screen with white lettering is not appropriate, but that's what we're getting to. And I know I need to do the trailer for when I'm not around.
Gotta start somewhere,
things,
right? Like,
yeah, but that's the thing, is you learn. And again, that's where I'm choosing to build. But for other things that I'm working on and for projects with my job, I needed a green screen. And now that I'm starting to read kids' books on Monday nights, then every time I hold the book up, you just get a glare from the light. So I knew I needed to invest in another light so I could offset that. And so, like, subtle changes that you need to make to, like, upgrades you need to do your thing. But that's the big thing, is definitely what I'm realizing is build yourself and work with others, support others.
You got to go slowly. Like, you need to, you need to take risks and make investments if you want to grow in general. And this applies to every industry. Sword and Board is like explicitly what I'm going to reference here. So you had to take risks, make investments, and spend some money in order to get the book out there and to get it out there in a high quality manner. But I'm also not going to jump over the fence with a $20,000 audiobook, right now for book one of a series that, long term, we don't know if it's going to pay for itself. Like, I think I did the math recently, and just to break even with what we've already spent, we have to sell, several thousand copies. So it's an interesting balance, essentially, trying to figure out how much investment you need versus how much caution. Because you can't just do nothing. You can't just spend no money.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can, but you have a quality ceiling at that point. And much like, so in most industries, there's essentially this quality ceiling where, you spend $5 and you get nothing. You spend, I'll use webcams as an example, or cameras on Twitch as an example, because it's a good one. Like, you could spend nothing and use your built-in laptop camera, and it's okay, it's passable. You spend $100 and you get a nice Logitech that is more than adequate for most streams, especially if the camera is like in a small corner of your stream. And then your next jump in quality is like a $700 mirrorless camera or something. Like, there's not that much difference between the probably the lowest level mirrorless and the highest level webcam, or even a mid-tier webcam. And then you can jump up from the mirrorless to things like full frame, and you're talking like $1,000 increase in price for a minuscule amount of improvement to your visual. So there's usually this sort of diminishing returns as you spend more money on almost everything. in life, and especially so for business, like for a small business like Sword and Board. Like I have to like carefully weigh where in that trajectory I need to hit in order to have like the minimum acceptable quality level and how much money needs to be spent to hit that, right?
Yeah, that is a big thing. And to how not to waste money. Like I made some mistakes in the beginning when I started streaming. I thought that, and Kitty, you're right. Increasing the video boxes is right. That's one of the things that I'm having an issue with right now. I'm trying to figure out how I want to patch things in. But for this, I found because some mistakes I made because I was trying to be smart, and some mistakes I made because I wasn't thinking. I'm a writer, and I tend to use laptops for everything because they're portable, and I can go work in different places and get inspiration and things like that. So of course, when I started streaming, my first thought was, "Oh, buy a laptop." Obviously, a
Oh,
big mistake. So when
yep.
my office is completed downstairs, I'll be switching over to a desktop, which also makes sense for writing as well. But anyway, so that was me not thinking. But the other side too is I thought, you know what, I wasn't sure how this was going to work out for me. So I bought a low level camera, I bought a low level light, and I bought a low level microphone. And then the streaming was a lot of fun. It was working. I was enjoying it. And then within 3 months, all of those low level things broke. I had to go out and buy better quality. So at that point, I was willing to pay for better quality to have these better items. Again, not going top of the range, going through the roof. I think the most expensive thing I got was the Blue Yeti microphone. And but
And even that is like, and that's a good price performance point, right? That's
yeah,
not like a $4,000 Neumann top of the line. It's also not a $400 Shure SMB, right? So
exactly.
like,
But I'm not doing music, right? And I'm not doing anything that like the audio quality has to be picture perfect and crisp and clean. And so for what I'm doing right now, it's functional and I enjoy using it.
yes,
But so
100%. You need to have a good microphone. Audio quality is really important. People aren't going to watch your stream if they can't understand what you're saying.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And it is a big thing. And I found there was just the microphone that I had, beyond the fact that after a couple months, anytime I touched it, the wire would fall out the bottom or would start jostling and cut out the audio. I would have to have it like right up in front of my face, so I always had the screen that was blocking me. And so this one works, and I just got more controls. But in trying to save money, I ended up costing myself $300 extra because
Yep.
I bought low end stuff that crapped out on me, and then I had to go buy the better stuff. So
Yep.
yeah, so there's some lessons learned along the way, and there's still lessons coming along, and that's why same thing actually with the green screen. I bought a green screen well previously, and it's not functional for what I need.
Yep.
So I ended up getting this one,
Green
which attaches.
screens green screens all come down to the quality of lighting, not the quality of the green screen itself. Like you have to have really uniform light in order to get chroma key to work properly.
Yeah,
So like, and it's things like that that you learn from experimenting and failing and then being like, oh, why did this fail? Oh, that's why it failed. Okay, now I've learned something and I can do better next time. So research is key when you're doing any new venture if you want to be successful. Like you need to have as much information when you make a decision as possible so that you don't make a bad decision.
yeah, it
And
definitely is true.
so Kitty mentioned in chat that she bought a cheap Logitech camera for FaceTime. Not sure if she wants to stream or not. So Kitty, like this is going through Discord, but the camera you see right now is literally just the standard Logitech C920. I simply pulled open the settings panel for it and tweaked it so it actually looks decent instead of, the crappy out of the box picture. So you can get a very good picture from a webcam.
Yep.
It's more important that you have good lighting, right? So having accent lighting in the background, having good like forward lighting on your face, really important. And that's going to help your picture much more than buying the top of the line camera will.
And that's a really big thing because I found like for mine, my camera is just an Osdom. It's not an expensive camera. But the thing that I found too was I was trying to set up my chroma key and get the green screen and everything functioning, and I kept having this grayed out blurry background, and I couldn't figure out why. And it was I actually ended up if I turn off, that light that you normally see glowing around me, I still have glowing. So if I turn it off, then you can see automatically my green screen stops functioning, or it's grainy, it's not as clear. So just having the same colored green lit up behind me
Yep.
solidifies and
It's
casts that.
100% light. Like chroma key works by matching a color over a specific range. So if you can get it to just be one color only by having uniform lighting, it makes it much easier on the software.
Yeah, and it works great. So I'm still learning a lot about that stuff, but that's part of the fun is picking things up. And honestly, when I first started doing this, I thought I'm going to go on stream and write, and who's going to sit there and watch me write? And now I've got over 200 followers and a bunch of subscribers, and that's something that is absolutely fantastic. Like it's working on.
Which is a great venue for exploring
that.
the arts in general, right?
Yeah.
There is a lot of people who are finally getting wise to the fact that Twitch is good for more things than gaming, because it's really just about live interactive content. So if you have something that can be improved by doing it in a group of people, or doing it where a group of people are watching somebody and interacting with them, then it can be done really well on Twitch. Like music is a great example. It's like our biggest growing vertical right now because it's just really well suited to the Twitch formula. It's somebody that comes into a stream, plays some music, everyone comments and talks about how awesome it is, asks the streamer to play something else, and they play something else.
Yeah.
It's a really nice thing. You can do the same thing with writing or with writing music. Even when I streamed, I was streaming writing music, and I would explain the choices I was making as I was making them. And there was a lot of people that were just really interested to know why are you writing that line for the trombones? Why aren't you doing it for some other instrument? And then I sit there and explain for 15 minutes why the trombones should be the ones playing this and not the French horns, right?
Yeah.
So
Kitty, you're absolutely right. My coloring is off, and it's because this is the first day with the green screen, the first live test, and therefore the balance is not done properly. So,
yeah, so
I do look a little purple.
I think his chroma key is taking all of the green out of his channel. So it basically has just replaced everything.
Yeah.
That's green, not just the background.
So I need to balance that. But again, like I said, I'm learning how to do this stuff. But that's the thing, actually, what I found with my writing was that, yes, there's people that are interested in the story you're working on, and the writing side of it works, and I do writing streams. But I also realized if I'm being a streamer about writing, I do streams that involve the back end of writing, how to market yourself, how to do your website, how to do newsletters, that kind of stuff. And then I also do streams that teach about writing, like how to plot, how to do different outlines, how to build character development, things like that. And then there's also my Thursday night streams, which are these, where we watch a movie and break them down, the plot points and stuff afterwards. We have interviews, we do workshops to help other people working on their stories. And there's going to be the panel where we discuss writing. And I find creating content that is engaging, that, like, so yes, there is a certain aspect of people sitting there helping you write a story or write a song, but also having other content that is still in line with what your core principle is, and having being able to build on that to build your brand and build up, like, so people know that they can come on this day for this, or they know that they can come at any time and ask you a question and have feedback from it. But yeah,
100%.
that is a thing with writing, is the same with writing music, where one comment can completely derail the entire stream or
So
conversation.
I actually got pretty good at talking about what I was doing and continuing to work and not stop what I was doing. But the thing that's interesting and slightly different about writing music, at least the way I personally compose, is that if you stop writing to talk to somebody on stream, you can't do anything sort of passive that is helpful for your writing usually, unless you can manage to keep two brain threads going at once, which some people can do pretty successfully. But for music, I need to a lot of times to audition what I've written to hear it back and make sure that it still sounds right. So if I start talking to the camera, I'll scroll back on my score, press play, and listen to what I had just written while I'm talking about why I wrote it that way. So I can sort of multi-thread, listening, hearing the feedback and making sure it's still sounding the way I want, with explaining stuff to the stream. So like there's just some cool opportunities with Twitch as a whole in general, and like how the tools work and the things that it allows you to do that you wouldn't be able to do in a normal setting. Like
Yeah.
in order to share, how I write music with people, I would need to be like in a classroom with a computer, with speakers, with a bunch of people huddled around my screen if I didn't have Twitch.
Yeah, and that's very true. And that's the thing I find is that right now I feel like I'm sitting on the very tip of a very massive iceberg. There's so much more for me to learn and be able to adapt and to pull from. And that's it. Like Guacamole Bill was saying, writers that actually get writing done on stream. When I'm writing, I can generally get through 1,000 to 2,000 words in a stream when I'm going along that way, if I'm having a good writing stream. But that's the thing that I find is that it depends on what the questions are and how you get pulled away from it. But I find you also draw inspiration. Like, it's great to be able to have, because behind my green screen here, I've got a Batman figurine that before Twitch I would use, and when I'm not streaming, that I use for my writing. Where if I get stuck in a spot and you just need to spit it out, then I will like look at Batman and be like, what do you think about this? And I'll like discuss the problem that I'm having. And he's a great listener. He never responds back.
Rubber ducking.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
programming, we call it rubber ducking.
Yeah, but it works.
From some other industry.
But I think that's the thing, is that and it also keeps you to task. I find writing on stream is a fantastic thing, and all in all, I'm absolutely loving it.
Yeah, Elche started streaming to do that, and she doesn't write on stream. she doesn't write on stream anymore. It's too much talking with the community at this point.
Well, actually, I have one day.
Like, yeah, I mean that's what Twitch is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be live interaction with the community. So, like, if you start with the intent on writing and you can provide content that way, but then you have a community that shows up that wants to talk to you, that seems like a good problem to have on Twitch, not a bad one.
Exactly. And that's why I find like I was doing more and more streams that were just writing streams, but now I've cut it down. Basically, my Monday night is my stream where I'm sitting down and I'm actually writing. But you're getting called out.
I can't out you when you're broadcasting yourself not writing day after day after day.
But that's the thing that I find, though, is having that community build up and the people that you can come in and that you can talk to and connect with is one of the biggest parts that I find of Twitch that I enjoy, is the people that I've connected with and just the opportunities that have come from it and everything, connecting with this.
Absolutely. I love it as both a creator and a viewer. Like, I love being able to go into other creator streams like yours or, any of the music streamers that I frequent, and be able to have a conversation with a random human being somewhere else on the globe and talk about really intelligent or interesting things. It's really, really good at connecting people in a way that is, healthier than something like Twitter, where, you send a tweet out and a million people respond. You can't respond to all of them. Like,
yeah.
Like a one-way relationship.
That's very true. But no, it's great. And it is an awesome spot to be able to develop your craft and develop what you're doing. And you learn, like as much as I try to give content that helps other people along, the amount of help that I receive from people in my chat and other people that I've connected with has just been an amazing push forward in things. But that's what there was something I was going to say about the getting at Batman, but
on that note, I want to echo the sentiments in chat right now, which is just that the writing community on Twitch that I've seen so far reminds me a lot of the music community on Twitch when it was in its infancy. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys grow.
Yeah, it is, and that's one of the things that I find I'm loving connecting, and that was the point I was going to make. Is my wife used to work in a cafe / bookstore. It's a used bookstore, also a coffee shop, and they served alcohol at a certain point as well, after a certain time. And I would go in with her every morning because she worked from 7 a.m. until 1 in the afternoon. And I'd go in and I'd sit at the front window and I'd write. That was my thing. And for the beginning, I got a ton of writing done. But then as people got to know who I was and recognize me, they would stop by and visit and have a quick couple of sips of coffee, a bit of a chat, and then they'd take off. And then it got to the point where I'd have 20 minutes of writing before the store opened. And then as soon as the store opened, it was a never-ending cycle of people going through my table. And it got to the point where I actually created a sign that was like, "Do not disturb, I'm writing." And I would take the sign down when people could come talk to me if I was like reviewing or something. But if I was trying to focus, I'd have to flip the sign up. Then it got to the point where the sign was just invisible and it just didn't matter anymore. And I had to stop working or writing in that cafe. And that's the kind of the thing with Twitch, is that as you build a community and as you build these connections and relationships with people, then it does become harder and harder to focus on the craft of writing, which is why I created as one day that I focus on that. And that is like an hour and a half.
And that's okay. There's like so much more to writing than just the act of putting words to paper. And a lot of that other stuff is really, really interesting content that needs to be on stream. So, like, kudos to you for identifying that and chasing it, because I think that's probably going to be better content in general than just watching somebody write.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I actually do try to, like, I am now, before I considered myself as a writer on stream, and now I do consider myself somewhat of a content creator because I'm actually I had someone in the beginning tell me that streaming wasn't hard because all you had to do was turn on a camera and start talking. And I was trying to explain that no, you actually have to, like, I treat this like a television show. Like, I used to do professional broadcasts and stuff, and to me that's what this is. In the beginning I was also too professional. I was too tight with everything, and I realized I had to relax things a little bit. But that's what I found with this is that in order to be successful, in order to have keep people maintained, is you have to have a content plan. You have to know what you're doing. I've always got a sheet beside me that's got, these are the key points I'm going to hit during, or try to hit during the stream. And that way you also don't have those dead zones where you're like, oh, what do I want to talk about now? You can just look over and you know what you're having. Like, you've got, if I'm on for 3 hours, there's 3 hours of content that's been planned, or at least I know I can do this point and that's going to lead to this much conversation, and then build out that way. But
Yeah, absolutely. Like, the turn on your camera and stream is the general approach of most League players, it feels like. That category is just inundated with thousands of people streaming, and half of them have 0 viewers. It's just like, what you're doing isn't working. You should try something else.
yeah, that's something that, I've tried. That's the same thing too, is actually when I'm on stream, if like on the Saturday nights we play games, and I keep myself in the writer's chat or the writer's channel when I'm doing that, because as we're playing games, we're still talking about writing. We're still talking about character development. Sometimes I'm talking about the writing within the game or something like that. But I also know that a lot of the people that follow me through the writing channel. And if I go into Minecraft and start a stream, nobody is going to find me. I'm going to be at the bottom of the heap of that. And I'm not a Minecraft streamer. So why am I going to try to throw my needle into that haystack when I'm still writing? So I'm going to stay in the writing stream and just happen to be playing a game at that point rather than actively writing on something.
And that's a Twitch pro tip, Twitch hack in general, is choosing categories and tags properly is going to go a long way towards helping you get discovered on Twitch. Twitch in general is not particularly good at discovery. So there's only a couple of different instances, a couple of different surfaces where people can find you. And having accurately tagged and categorized content is one of the best ways to do that. But also understanding the value of specific categories if you fit into multiples. Like, for instance, a lot of writers I see end up streaming in this writer's game, right, which isn't technically a writer category, but it works really well because it's a game that isn't played. There's a lot of writers that stream in just chatting. A lot of them are not very successful because just chatting is a huge category and they're very, very far at the bottom of the category. If you find a medium-sized category that has a lot of viewers but not very many streamers, you want a high number of viewers to streamer ratio, right? If you find one of those categories that you can fit into, you'll be near the top and you'll have the opportunity to get a lot of viewers. So, like, at some point though, once you have enough viewers, you will be at the top of the next highest best category, like just chatting, right? So if you were to get yourself to 200 concurrent viewers, at that point it might be better for you to be in just chatting than in the writers, because you'll have more eyes seeing you because you're high enough in the category to be visible. And like things like that are things that a lot of streamers don't really spend time thinking about, but they need attention if you want to be successful.
Yeah, and that definitely is the thing that I found, that when I obviously the content is one thing, because I find even on the days that I am streaming a game, my views are way down. I don't have the same content. Now that I flipped it to Saturday night, it's a little bit better, but that is the thing that I found, is that once I switched over to writers, I started getting more eyes on me, because I was trying just chatting as well, and I was just getting buried, definitely. But it's interesting to know that once you hit a certain level in the algorithm, to jump over, and that will give you another boost. But it's a pretty great system and program to be working with. It's all because of COVID that I found this, and that I started this.
Nice.
Yeah.
You and everybody else.
Well, because I was working in the classical music industry, and we had to cancel our festival, and then we're turning around to figure out what we could do, and they decided to go virtual. And then I worked with the creative director to develop the virtual program, and we were looking at using a program like Zoom or something else, or Twitch. And I'd seen Twitch memes and stuff, but I'd never paid attention to it. And then, so I downloaded to check it out to see whether or not it would be a viable fit. And then I started watching a few streams and got interested. And I thought, what if I were to try doing this for writing? And then because I had to buy the equipment for work anyways, so I had the equipment. So then I ended up
that's fantastic.
getting here. Yeah.
Yeah, and the music category in particular grew a lot during COVID because everybody was in the same place you were. They couldn't tour, so they jumped on Twitch. The DJ segment in particular, like, doubled in size or more. Like, it's insane how many DJs there are on Twitch.
That's wild. It's good though. Like, it is something that has helped people and has created a way of making money. But there's still a lot to learn. Like, I found something today that I'd never seen before, and it was a Twitch streamer who we follow each other on Instagram, and she had posted an Instagram story saying that she was going live on Twitch, which is fine. But she actually had a little box at the bottom that was a countdown timer that was counting down to the time that she went live. There was like 38 seconds when I looked at it. And if you clicked on the box, then it gave you an option to get a notification from Instagram to remind you that this person was going live on Twitter or on Twitch. So there's things like that. Like, there's one of the next things I need to look at is integration into other social media. Because right now I use the OBS Streamlabs auto tweet function, and I put out my own messages. But I know there's a lot more integration that you can tie in.
There's a lot of integration now across various media platforms. A lot of ways to get notifications that your favorite streamers have gone live. But the most successful streamers are doing that sort of like cross-site content strategy where they're creating stuff on YouTube, posting on Twitter, creating stories on Instagram, and then tying all of that back to the Twitch stream, which happens, less frequently and not daily all the time. There's really only a few of the classic streamer type left that are people who stream, 40 to 60 hours a week and are, just streaming and not creating content in any other fashion. And most of the reason that they're in the position that they're able to do that is that they're at the top of their field for whatever they're streaming. Like Shroud is, one of the best FPS players in the world. That's why he's always got 20,000 people watching him. Like, yeah. like he doesn't need to do anything except for play those games all day long because he's the best at it. So
yeah, that's it. But the cross-platform stuff really works. Like, I have to say, there was a day a little while ago where I was scrolling through Reddit, and a picture of, like, all of a sudden this picture flowed past, and I was like, wait a minute. And I stopped and I scrolled back, and it was LJ. And it was a picture of promoting her book. And there was this blurb and whatever about her book on that. And that was something that I was like, there was almost like the shock that went through me, like, hey, I know that person. Like, there's a connection here. It's
Yep.
Yeah, it was so it really does work, and it does have that. And again, it creates more of a sense of familiarity when you've got someone that, because I mean, just Instagram, and more so I find than Twitter, does create this, I'm going to say, artificial sense of familiarity, because you get to see behind the scenes of someone's life, but it's obviously only the scenes that they want you to see. It's
the term you're looking for is parasocial relationship. So it's a one-way relationship where you know everything about their life and they know nothing about yours. So it's the same type of relationship that people have with celebrities and whatnot. And social media enables that quite a bit. One of the things I like about Twitch is that the chat and the ability for the streamer to interact immediately with you in the chat enables, especially smaller streamers, to interact directly and form pro-social relationships instead of parasocial ones.
So yeah, that's parasocial. I'm going to remember that. I'm not going to, but I'm going to have to remember a parasocial relationship. And like LJ was just saying, from that day, 25 updates, a ton of new Instagram followers, Discord followers, and led to more Twitch followers and patrons. So it
also led to a lot of book sales too. Like I didn't look at the final numbers from that, but that gave us quite a big boost in the actual book sales. So it was very successful for what it was supposed to be, which was literally, I was like, hey, all these other authors are posting pictures of themselves on our picks and getting, 40,000 upvotes. You should go do that. So she went and did it, and then she was dumb and followed my advice and posted multiple links and violated the subreddit rules and got banned. So that was 100% my fault for misunderstanding the rule, which is also kind of dumb.
It worked.
I've started to see now recently these streamers that have this one link type of thing. So they'll put it in like their YouTube or wherever else, and it's literally just a web page that has links to all of the various things like their socials, their Twitch, everything. And it's like a super simple mobile friendly site that they link everywhere. So we maybe need to build one of those for LJ so that when she does that again, she can literally post that one link and it'll be like, here's what you click to buy the book. Here's what you click to follow on Twitch. Instead of having to post all that stuff when people ask.
That's actually a great idea because you see that on, I was going to say Linktree. I was going to say you see that on TikTok all the
Yep.
time.
Yep.
And that's, again, I never made the connection of I should be doing the same thing. I should have a
Yeah.
Linktree for
And
that.
it turns out that that isn't just like a small convenience thing for things like Reddit, where there's rules like you can only post one link. That's a requirement. Like you need something like that because you can't even respond to comments for people asking for links. That was the thing that blew my mind is that
Really?
she didn't go out of her way to post all of these various things or here buy our book here and do this here and do this here. It was somebody asked a question, where can I buy the book? She said, oh, here at this link. Oh, hey, do you have Twitter? Can I follow you? Yes, it's here, right? Like just answering questions like a normal friendly human being is considered advertising in that particular sub. So
Wow.
you need Linktree.
Yeah, there we go. Linktree, we're going to have to get set up.
Oh, you already have one? Okay, of course. She already had one and we didn't use it. GG us. But yeah, like so engaging on other platforms is really, really important, not just for growing your brand and for marketing, but also just for you can't connect with everybody in one place, right? And I guess this really is marketing, is what we're really getting down to is, if I spend $1,000 on some advertisements on Google or something, I'm not necessarily going to hit everybody that might be legitimately interested in LJ's book. Like
Yeah.
it's a very interesting book for a certain segment of people. The problem is figuring out how to let those people know that this book exists for them and that it could, provide them with good entertainment or, other kind of emotional value if they found it. And marketing really isn't about selling out, which I think a lot of people kind of think of. It's really about identifying those people who are your market, people who want your product, and figuring out a way to get it into their hands. And so, like for us, we need things like Reddit and
Hmm.
Twitter and Instagram and all those platforms because, like, everybody isn't in one place; they're spread out all over the place. So I need to try everywhere to try to find the people who are interested in the book.
That's a really good point, and also finding which ones don't really work, and um, that's one thing I found is I even now you hear me when I'm talking about my socials, I say you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, but I do also have an author page on Facebook, but I find that's something that I've rarely now with Twitch I've actually gained more traction on that, but I find
Mm-hmm.
that's like my least effective method of social media is that, but it's also one that I haven't really pounded the drum too hard.
Yeah, and that stuff changes over the years too. And it depends a lot on what industry you're in and whatnot. But like for us, when we originally were streaming, Facebook was pretty important. But nowadays, Facebook is not as important as something like Instagram.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, like I was saying, like Instagram really is this thing that I find is, of all the social medias, I find Instagram to be very interesting because it does create that artificial sense of connectivity where you feel like you know what's going on inside this person's life. And, but again, it's very structured and they're defining what aspects you're seeing. But that was the thing I found with watching. I'm a big fan of The Office, and Angela Kinsey, who plays Angela in The Office, I ended up following her, and Jenna Fisher as well as a couple of others. But I was watching this, like connecting with with Angela Kinsey on Instagram, and then there was curator was the word I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw that her husband got sick with COVID, her kids got sick with COVID, and her mom fell ill, and then she fell ill, and you just have this really interesting connection of, it's like wow, this it kind of humanizes the person that you're dealing with, and I think that is what creates the more feeling of intimacy with that. But like you said, it's very artificial, and it's something that you have to be careful with, and it's something that can also be dangerous, as we've seen play out with a couple of different Twitch streamers. And that's something that I'm noticing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems like Twitch is becoming like a new Hollywood, in a sense that in the beginning Hollywood was what it was, but then it grew to a size that, and people grew to a certain level of fame, that they started needing PR reps and agents and people helping them navigate this popularity and this massive onslaught of eyes on them on their daily lives. And I find that Twitch is kind of getting to that same level now, where you've got some, like, there's some drama that's happening at the higher echelons of the streamers. They're backbiting each other and fighting, all these other things that are happening, but then also getting into just like doing silly things that are getting themselves into trouble, that all of a sudden you're now seeing Twitch streamers with PR reps that are coming out and being like, actually what he meant by this was.
So streamers have been having beef as long as there has been Twitch.tv. In fact, as long as there's been Justin.tv. So, like, streamers being humans isn't new. However, the PR reps is slightly new-ish. It depends. Like, Twitch has had some really high-level popularity for quite a while now. Pretty much ever since Drake played Fortnite with Ninja, Twitch kind of took off mainstream from a popularity perspective. There was already a lot of streamers that were big enough to have reps before that happened, but a lot more have grown to that size since that happened. And, you know, Twitch, when it partners with larger streamers, it does so differently than it does with your average partner or your average affiliate, right? If you're just a regular person who makes partner for the first time, you're not going to get the same experience as somebody who is bringing in 200,000 views a stream to the platform, right? That person is probably going to have, you know, a more personal relationship with Twitch. They're probably going to have their own contract. They're probably going to have, you know, individual people that they interact with because they're having a more of a material impact on the business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a fact of life. You know, unfortunately, when you're dealing with capitalism and with business, you know, not everybody is equal in terms of how they affect Twitch as a business. You know, Twitch will do its best to help all creators equally. So hopefully those type of things are really just special things you need when you get that large, like PR reps, right? If you have 200,000 views a stream and you're trying to maintain a brand, you probably, one, can afford to hire a PR rep, and number two, you probably are going to want to, because you want to make sure that you are acting in the best interest of your, you know, business, your brand.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point too, that with the connection with the higher streamers, because they're more materialistically helping Twitch. As much as Twitch likes to support their community and they do great things for the arts and what they're doing, at the end of the day, it is a business. And that's one of those things that, you know, there's a lot of writers, myself included, are just itching to have a writing stream, a writing channel of our own, something that we can focus on. But again, it comes down to metrics. I'm sure there's got to be certain levels that have to be hit and certain key factors that Twitch is looking at. That's like, in order for this to happen, we need this to happen for us to quantify or qualify doing and adding something like that in. And I think we can get there if we keep working and doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely 100%. If you continue to grow a writing community on Twitch, you eventually will get the support that other communities have. And a good example of this is just look at the way categories were when they were first introduced. There was an IRL category. That IRL category has now been split into something like 30 different subcategories, of which just chatting is one, music is one, arts and crafts is one. Like, there's a whole bunch of subcategories now, and it's because all of those segments grew on their own to become large enough to warrant an entire category. So if the writer community continues to grow, something similar will happen, where the writers will get their own category. But, you know, there has to be, the problem is it's not about doing what makes the most sense for the creator. You have to remember that there's viewers on the platform too. Yeah. Viewers need to find your content. And if there's a billion categories that all just have like 5 streams, it just makes it look like the platform is empty, when realistically there's just a lot of loosely related things that should be in like a super category, which is what just chatting is, right? It's a bunch of people chatting about random things that there's not enough of to have a single you know, category for each one.
It's a really good perspective to put on that.
As a viewer, if you go to look for writers on Twitch and you click on it, you want to see a page of results. You don't want to see 2 streams, right? Yeah. So, like, helping us investing time to help viewers find two streams is not valuable to the viewer, and it's not valuable to you, because now we've wasted our time on something that only helps, a minuscule sliver of creators, where we could have spent that time building something that affected everybody. So it's a balancing act. They look at the numbers, they try to figure out when the best time to create a new category is, and then they do it. The most recent one they created was the hot tub category, and I'm sure you guys all know a lot about the hot tub stuff, so I don't need to spend time talking about it. But there's a lot of reasons why categories get created, and that category to me is a good success story for Twitch, because it met the needs of everybody involved. Right now, the people who want to stream that type of content can do so on Twitch, and they can do it in a way where it's not going to negatively impact the advertisers, and it's not going to negatively impact the viewers, because the viewers now know what they're looking for. Like, they have to go and look for the hot tub category to find that stuff. Yeah. So, like, it's just a better solution overall.
And I actually found, I haven't spent a lot of time in the hot tub category, but I've popped in a few times to see just what's happening, and I was actually kind of surprised. I was anticipating one form of entertainment in the hot tub category, and I found it was very, like, it was diverse. It was really diverse. Like, there was one point...
It became the meme category because of the way it happened. Yeah. It became a meme category. So there's a lot of streamers that would find, like, a graphic or an image or a video of, like, just a hot tub and put it on the background while they did a just chatting stream. Like, so yeah. There's all kinds of random stuff that you can find in the category because it was the in meme, essentially, to stream in. Yeah, but that's just one example of how categories come into creation. There's lots of examples. Music as a category didn't exist until there was enough music specific streams to warrant it.
And I think that's one of the things. I have gone into a couple of the different writing discords and tried to nudge people into using the writers category, because again, if we have 50 writers streaming over 40 different channels or categories, then it's going to be scattered out. Like you said, you want to see that wall. So we can have one category that a lot of writers agree on. And unfortunately, hijacking a game that's not being played, which every time I turn on my stream, I feel bad for. But if we can get a collective into one section and support each other, follow each other, connect with each other, and watch each other's streams and things like that, then we'll get to where we need to go.
Yep, 100%. And Twitch is watching that. They do lots of data analysis. So, they'll notice if you guys get a lot of streamers in the category.
Yeah, so we need to keep pushing on that. Well, this has been a fantastic stream. I had a lot of fun with this.
Yeah.
We've rolled over a time that we normally do, which is great. I've enjoyed it. But I was going to... So with this, I want to have you back on to chat again sure. And to connect. This has been fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and I think it's been really informative for a lot of the viewers for a lot of different reasons. I think we've covered, like I promise, this is kind of a Renaissance stream where we just kind of touched upon a variety of different things.
I can talk about a lot of things, and I'm happy to come back and talk anytime.
That is fantastic. But to that end, one thing I did want to bring up is when we were talking the other day, you mentioned that it's a good thing to support other groups, and you were saying that if the writers interacted more with the musicians, we might be able to learn from each other and share with each other. So I am going to have to call the stream here very soon because I do have to go take care of the baby. But what I was going to say is, just before we wrap things up really quickly, I'm going to be streaming again, everybody, on Saturday night at 10 p.m. We're doing the late night game stream, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, back to regular writing on Monday. But with that, thank you very much, everybody, for being here and for joining us. Thank you very much, Composer, for this. I greatly appreciate it. And all the people in chat for the follows, for the subs, gifted subs, all the bits, all the love that's been going through. It's been a great connection with everyone today.